Hello everyone, and welcome to the Dice Commando YouTube channel. I'm Andrew, with you here as always. This is the Commando Chat, a no-holds-barred, anything-goes videocast about everything and anything gaming related. This video and others like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. Please show your support with a like and subscribe, and be sure to hit the bell notification icon so you don't miss any new videos. If you want to get involved with the channel, consider becoming a channel member. There are many benefits to channel membership, including access to our Discord, exclusive deck tech and strategy videos, and the opportunity to help create channel content. I want to sincerely thank all our channel members, as I truly couldn't do this without your support. You guys rock. Go Commando. Hello everyone, welcome to Dice Commando and the Commando Chat. I'm Andrew with you here as always, and thank you for joining me today for a conversation about a horrible, nasty, no good word in gaming, and that is rotation. Right? While the concept of some of our bought, used product suddenly becoming quote-unquote worthless, or moving on to a different phase than we were used to using and having to kind of change our plans and decks, it's super annoying, right? Nobody specifically necessarily likes it. What we're here to talk about today is why it's an absolutely necessary construct in gaming. Hello everyone, thanks for joining me again today while we go through the pros and cons and kind of talk about, why rotation is, a necessary evil in gaming. And, just to be clear, obviously the Star Wars Destiny background, a lot of the motivation for this cast actually has come from my experience with the Star Wars Destiny community, because quite frankly, in short, I've never really been a part of a gaming community that has elements that are so fanatically against the concept of rotation. And while it can kind of be confusing as all heck for a game that you want to live, right, it doesn't make sense to do this as a Commando cast because, let's be honest, right, trying to talk to someone who doesn't want rotation or who doesn't like the concept of it is kind of like playing the why game with a toddler, right? It's like no matter what you say, it's going to be why, or there's going to be a circular argument back to where you were. And actually, sometimes that's kind of actually insulting to toddlers, probably, because at least with the toddler you can say because I said so and the game will end, right? Whereas in this case it just keeps going and going, right? So that's why I didn't want to do this as a Commando cast and specifically talk about Destiny. And the reality is this is not a Destiny thing, right? This is a thing in gaming. So before we get into this, let's be clear, right? No one really likes rotation, right? Well, actually that's not true. Distributors and stores like rotation because it helps to sell the product, and obviously game creators like it because it helps to sell the product, right? So they do, of course, but no one really likes the concept of their favorite deck suddenly losing half of its cards, or having to go out and change formats or whatever it may be. Even though many of us may be excited for new product or for change, right? And that's obviously the positive side of this. But we as players can dislike the concept, and maybe dislike's too strong of a term, right? But we as players can certainly, wish that our decks weren't being destroyed or whatever, while understanding the necessity of something like rotation to keeping our game as a whole strong, right? Because what good is it going to do us to play the same deck for 10 years if nobody's playing that game anymore, right? So, how I want to approach this is when having a discussion about rotation, one of the first arguments that I always hear come up is no game without rotation has ever survived. And, that's not entirely true as it is anyway. But if you're someone who's very anti-rotation, I can understand why that argument would actually be very infuriating to you, right? Because it's almost kind of like a chicken-egg thing, right? In that only the games that are alive have had rotation, right? So that's, are all the alive games alive because they had rotation? Or is rotation what's keeping those alive, right? So I can understand why that would be an infuriating argument, because it can kind of be self-fulfilling, right? So basically what I want to boil down to, or way I want to approach this is I want to look at a couple examples of games that I've played in the past, both of games that are still alive and games that have died, and why rotation was a factor, or the absence of rotation was a factor in that. And really what it boils down to is just because it is the way it is, meaning just because rotation is out there, like Magic has rotation and stuff like that. And to be clear, there are games out there that don't have rotation, they just power creep the snot out of it, right? So that's really what I want to focus on, is looking at differences of different games out there and how they failed or succeeded, or really, you know, just where we go from there and how rotation fits into the general concept of that game's performance or where it is today. So one of the first things I want to talk about is Magic the Gathering, right? It's the beast in the room. They obviously have a very functional rotation system that's kept them relevant and selling product for a long, long, long time. So one of the decks I want to pop up is this one. And even if you're not familiar with Magic, I want to take just a minute to kind of walk through how this works, right? So this is the cycling one-shot, and there's various versions of this. And this is like a historic, or, you know, kind of like an infinite for other games, right? Basically, it's a format of where a lot more stuff is legal than your standard current modern format, whatever it may be. Right, so the way this deck works is it uses this card called Treasure Hunt. And Treasure Hunt reveals cards from the top of your deck until you reveal a non-land card. And then one of the ones that's currently in favor is Zenith Flare. What Zenith Flare is, it deals X damage to any target, and you gain X life, where X is the number of cards with cycling in your graveyard. You combine that, like that in itself, not a big deal, right? But you combine that with the fact that you can run you run those two cards, only run 4 copies of Treasure Hunt. Maybe you don't even run 4 copies of the Flare, because you're just trying to hit for once and win. And then you run nothing else in your deck except for these lands with cycling. So what happens is you end up drawing, once you get Treasure Hunt off, you end up drawing like 30 cards, 20 cards, whatever it may be. And then you, of course, have to discard down. Those all go into your discard pile. And then once you hit round 4, you have the mana you need, you drop Zenith Flare, and you just win, right? So I think the majority of people out there, even if you're not super familiar with Magic, you would understand it. That's probably not the way the game was designed to be built or to be played, right? Now there are a lot of problems with this deck, which is why, you know, one of the questions that an anti-rotation person will often use is like, we'll just balance the cards, we'll just ban some cards, stuff like that, right? And in this case, there's no reason to do anything about this deck, because it dies to a simple counterspell. Or if somebody can remove the graveyard, exile the graveyard, it's ineffective, right? So there's nothing specifically wrong with this deck in terms of power level, right? It's not, I mean, it's winning some things, but it's not going to like dominate the format, because there's a lot of ways to stop it. So you get into this problem where, you know, it's kind of a feel bad for someone who just wants to play the normal game. And that's really the problem, is you have, as these expanded formats, these historic, limited, infinite, whatever you may call them format, the all-encompassing formats, let's call it that, you start to get these combos that are just uncontrollable. And if you just start banning everything, then you start to create other problems as well. And like I said, in this format, there's nothing wrong with this, because there's plenty of ways to counter it. So then the argument would be, well, if someone doesn't want to play this type of deck, they just shouldn't play that format. And that is a perfect argument. The problem being, if you don't have some sort of rotation format, you can't make that argument, right? If it's just the game, right? If there's just a game, there's only one format, you can't go play another format, aside from having a deal with your buddies to just handshake and not play that, right? So that's why Magic has really succeeded in that. So this brings me to kind of my point for today is, without rotation, there's really only 2 things that happen to a game, as there's really only 2 ways that a game can continue to evolve. The first is power creep, and then the second is this impact of diminishing returns or stagnation. Okay, so for my power creep example, I actually want to go back to the late 90s, use a game I played when I was in middle school called Doomtrooper. What you're seeing on your screen now is, on the left side, you're seeing Yojimbo and Sean Gallagher. They were rares from the core set. They were very hard to find, especially for a middle schooler who didn't have a lot of money. To be clear, packs were only like 50 cents and $1 at the time, so even so, we weren't pulling a lot of rares. And it was super cool to have these named guys. And if you look at the stats on them, okay, I mean, you don't understand the game, and it doesn't matter, but you see Yojimbo's a 7.5/7.7. You see Sean, he's got that big old 10, and then a little 3 and an 8.8. But now let's hop a couple sets down the road, and this set actually came out after I had already jumped ship on it. But you look at Shinobi, who was a common in, I think this was only like 4 or 5 expansions down the road. He's a 3.9/8.8. And then you look at, okay, he costs a little more, he's got a different setup, maybe he's not quite the same as Yojimbo, but you can very easily see that Yojimbo being a rare, like one of the chase cards in the core set, you're now looking at a common that's at least as good, if not arguably better than him, right? And then you see the same thing again there with Timothy McGuire on the right. He's a 4-10-7-7 versus Sean being a 10-3-8-8, right? So what you're seeing is, even if in this case you want to say they're equivalent, the point is, as the sets evolved in Doomtrooper, they had to make the characters stronger and stronger and stronger to make people want to continue to buy product. Because if you don't do that, and you're not kicking and rotating cards out of the format, the only way to continue to sell product is by power creeping. And if you really think about it, that's a form of forced rotation, right? Because your older cards suddenly don't become powerful enough to be in your deck, so you're rotating them out as it is. And to be clear, Doomtrooper was dead not dead, but Doomtrooper was in trouble way before this, because they actually had this problem where you couldn't keep characters in play anyway, so the power of your character was kind of irrelevant, and that's kind of why this happened. But the point's still very valid in that in order to get people to continue chasing the cool stuff, they had to make the cool stuff cooler. Okay. We then come to the next problem, and this is unfortunately how one of my favorite games. Well, let's just go to it, right? Diminishing returns and stagnation. One of the favorite games I ever played was 7th CCG. This was early, I think it was late 90s, early 2000s. It was early 2000s. And great, fantastic game. And what I'm showing here on the screen, again, it doesn't matter if you know how to play the game or not. But what happened is that they did not have rotation. And as each new set would come out, they did a fantastic job, better than any other company I've ever seen, of keeping their power creep checked. They were increasing, the flavor of the cards, the combinations of the cards. They did a very good job. But came Scarlet Seas expansion, which I think was either set 5 or 6 or something like that down the road. And I had my deck that I'd been playing for several metas, if you wanted to even call it that back then. And one of the few cards I needed from the Scarlet Seas expansion was Annie Rush, and she was a common, right? So I was very into the game, and I was very into collecting the set, so I was buying more than I probably should have been at that phase of my life. But the point was, if I was someone who didn't, I could have completed what I needed from my deck, in theory, for pennies on the dollar, right? For probably $1 and overpaying for commons. And that's not the way that you keep a CCG alive, because then people don't need the product, right? So that's the problem in of itself from a longevity of the game. And then you also run into the fact that, think about what I just said. I'd been playing the same deck with, swapping 1 or 2 cards out as new stuff came in. I'd been playing the same functional archetype deck for several metas. That's definitely leads to a very stale and stagnant game in and of itself, right? So you have multiple things going on here, and argument number one that it has to boil down to, it has to, because that's just the reality of it. It doesn't affect our kitchen table stuff, but we all like seeing new product, regardless of whether you like rotation, regardless of whether you don't. We like seeing new product, and the only way they can sell new product and keep this whole thing going is if they either power creep, which, to be frank, destroys the game over time, or if they go stagnant and then they fail at that. So rotation really is the best way to keep things fresh and keep them on top. And then again, you can go to these different formats and people aren't forced to sit down and play against these bad decks, right? I mean, you reference a lot of the games out there that I don't even touch because I don't want to be a part of that type of thing. Like a Yu-Gi-Oh is a perfect example, right? There are games out there right now that do not have rotation, and those games have a lot of inherent problems because of that. And most of them are related to power creep, right? So that's really my explained in-depth case, trying to use some relevant examples of, we don't nobody likes the fact that you now have a shoebox full of cards sitting on your shelf that you paid for, you once loved, and you can't use again. Nobody likes the fact that, man, this was one of the favorite decks I've ever played, I can't play it anymore. But you're still playing your game, right? And that's a very hard thing to continue to do for a very long time if the company's under pressure and if you get bored. I mean, that's just really what it boils down to. So rotation is definitely a necessary evil in our line of enjoyment these days. yeah, so that's my piece today. So hopefully I've convinced you. Like, again, you don't have to like it. I mean, I don't think any of us likes it, but we do prefer it because it helps keep our games alive. So anyway, that's my piece. Thanks for joining us today, and go Commando.